Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which was interesting. He said, what do you think about guys like Layne Norton, and I'll also throw in my bro Alan Aragon in there, who say things like clean eating can't be defined. It's not really real. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about that. All right, great topic, and I think when this gets brought up, it's kind of being done to whitewash the topic itself. And it's not addressing the real issue here, the real concerns of why people who do understand nutrition care about these things. And it's being done to push people away from orthorexia nervosa, which is the whole idea of clean eating list where you have strict foods that you can eat and strict foods that you can't eat, that all foods on this list are good and all foods on this list are bad. And that's really not the way to go about things. Because any food in moderation isn't going to be bad for you other than maybe trans fats and certain maybe really heated vegetable oils and things like that. No actual food is bad for you until we start getting into highly refined chemicals like that. And I know everything's chemicals, but the difference is trans fats are actually dangerous chemicals. There's a lot of good chemicals in your food too. Now, I threw in Alan Aragon in there also to make this a little more balanced because people are going to be like, well, you and Layne don't get along, so this is just an attack on him. But a lot of people know that I've been friends with Alan Aragon since long before I was even on YouTube. I like Alan. I respect Alan's opinion. I respect his opinion as a nutritionist and as a researcher. So, yeah, I'm going to throw Alan in there too as someone that I am friends with and do like so that people can see that I'm not doing this because of that. And yeah, I think the problem they have there is that they aren't really going into the other end of the psychological component when they define this. Because let's be honest, guys, while you can't put an exact definition on clean eating, you can't break it down very specifically, I think you can make general guidelines, general stuff that's in the ballpark as far as what healthy eating means. But I do agree that you shouldn't have lists of good and bad foods if that is itself an eating disorder. Again, that's called orthorexia nervosa. That is now a clinically diagnosable eating disorder, to where if you have a strict set of foods that you cannot eat because they're bad foods, and this list is not given to you by a medical doctor, meaning if you throw gluten on there, then there's something going on. If you've not been diagnosed with celiac disease and you have gluten as an evil food you can't touch, you could be developing orthorexia nervosa. But that's just one component of a food. It's people who have these whole lists of, they can't eat any table sugar. They can't eat apples. They can't eat whatever it happens to be. And it could be because they're following a structured diet, but those structured diets tend to sometimes that have food exclusions lead to eating disorders. They lead to orthorexia nervosa when taken to the extreme. Lists like that should be taken as very, very loose guidelines. It's like the whole concept of the paleo diet. It becomes crazy when people start really trying to break it down, define, and act like it actually really replicates a Paleolithic diet, because it doesn't in any way. But if they keep it listed as, hey, our diet, we need to eat mostly lean proteins and lots of vegetables, that needs to be the foundation of our diet. Okay, well, that's not that bad. That's a loose guideline. But when they come up and say you can't ever eat grains, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, when they have a full exclusion list and people get stressed if they eat them, meaning they're at a social gathering and that's what people happen to be eating, handing around a little bit of that, and they just can't eat it because it's not allowed on their diet. And if they were to take a bite of it, it would cause them anxiety, elevated heart rate, things like that. They probably have an eating disorder now as a result of following this structured diet. So that's why you have people like that who are saying, look, you can't define these things clearly, because we can't. Because diet's about balance. And from a nutritional end, as long as your diet is mostly whole foods, and you don't eat excessive amounts of anything that we would think of as normally bad, such as fructose. Fructose in moderation doesn't hurt anyone. Fructose in excess has been linked to 4 or 5 major medical diseases because of the way the liver has to process it. But in moderation, it doesn't do any of those things. Saturated fat in moderation has never been linked to cardiovascular disease. Saturated fat in excess has been linked to various cardiovascular diseases. There's a strong correlation there that's been found. And that's not just the Ansel Keys 7-nation study. That is modern blood work showing some of that too. So you've got that to consider. And then even water. I mean, water falls in that category. You die without water. You drink too much water, it will kill you also. It's called water intoxication. And yes, several people die from it, even in the United States every single year. It kills people. Drinking excessive water will kill you. Usually when it's part of some crazy fad thing they're doing, or it's part of hazing of some type, is usually when it happens. But yeah, water kills you drinking. If you drink like 3 gallons in a day, well, there's a good chance you're going to die from it. That's usually around the number. So, difference between moderation and that. The problem we get into, though, is that it doesn't get addressed. This is for dealing usually with competitive individuals who are competing in something. They're talking about bodybuilders and other people. Because the truth is, most people who are extremely athletic can get away with some junk food and they're going to burn it off. In fact, I know some athletes who have to eat junk food just to maintain their body weight and their performance simply because they burn through so many calories. If they were to eat what we would call clean foods, bro foods, whatever you want to call them, only they wouldn't get enough calories in to actually be able to do what they're trying to do. They would start losing weight, and I've known of something like that. I mean, Alex Viada is a perfect example of that. And then people say, well, you can't define junk food. Sure you can. You can define junk food as anything that's low in fiber or low in protein. Meaning if it's got high amounts of protein in it or high amounts of fiber, it probably isn't junk food. If it's low fiber and low protein, probably junk food. And even if it's got high amounts of protein, but it's got large amounts of fat in it and very little fiber, we probably count that as junk food. There you go. There's a loose guideline. How much is a lot? I don't know. You tell me. Do we really need to define that specifically? Is it that important to set specific numbers for general guidelines? Of course not. And everyone knows what these things are. I'll give you an example. Do we really need an exact definition? If I tell you go in and eating a hamburger and french fries and soda from McDonald's is junk food, is anyone going to argue with that who really thinks about just the general term? No. How about a Snickers bar? How about a Mars bar? Is that junk food? This isn't difficult, people. And when people try to say, oh, you can't define that yet, I can give those examples that 90% of people will agree, yeah, that counts as junk food. Then basically you're being a fucking idiot if you can't look at that and realize that that's what we're doing. These are general guidelines. And most people understand what junk food is. All right? A Happy Meal, Chicken McNuggets and a Happy Meal with a Coca-Cola is fucking junk food. A Snickers bar is fucking junk food. It doesn't require a genius to know these things. The average person can grasp this concept. Yet we have intelligent people who want to clearly define everything who can't seem to grasp the concept. Come on, guys. Don't be fucking morons. Now, what we need to also look at here is the moderation issue. Not everyone can do moderation. In fact, we've got studies on that. We have studies now showing that people who have struggled with dopamine response in their brain, which means people who are genetically predisposed to addiction, cannot handle certain foods in moderation. They cannot handle really refined carbohydrates in moderation, for example. All right, the insulin surge they get from it, the effects they get from it affect their dopamine different in their brain than different people. It affects it very much like cocaine does. Again, there's data out there on this, and what happens is they tend to overeat. They will eat the entire box of cookies. Now, the sugar itself in the cookies might not be a big deal, because carbs aren't particularly fattening. Even sugar isn't particularly fattening. But all the vegetable shortening and butter put in those cookies too, when they eat the whole box, guess what? Will, over time, if they chronically do this, negatively affect their health and negatively affect their body weight. So that's why we need to look at these things and talk about this, because there are people who have to have foods that they can't eat, and it's not because they're bad foods intrinsically in moderation, because they aren't. It's that many people, due to their brain response, the way that their hormones and chemicals in their brain respond, their neurotransmitters, when they try to eat some of these foods in moderation, they can't do so. And their moderation becomes a binge. Or what we found in some of the studies, maybe they do okay on that one little meal. They eat those 2 or 3 cookies and they set them down. But then when their lunch comes around, they're twice as hungry as they were before, and they end up eating 20% more calories than they normally would have eaten had they not eaten the cookies. All right, you see the problem here for people with an obesity problem. We're dealing with an addiction problem at this point. Because it now sparks hunger, the food that they ate that was already calorically dense made them hungrier at their next mealtime due to the dopamine response in their brains. And you can't control that. People talk about willpower. Willpower is nothing to do but it's your brain chemicals. That's it. That's all willpower is. So if something negatively affects your brain chemicals in a way that causes addiction, willpower doesn't even fucking play into it. That's like telling someone who goes and shoots heroin 3 or 4 times that they just need to have willpower and not go inject it again once they get hooked on it. That's the level of stupidity we're dealing with. You're talking about addiction. And that's exactly what it is. And the data is showing that more and more, that there's an addiction problem that a certain percentage of the population have with highly refined carbs and sugar and other foods that will cause them to overeat no matter how much they do not want to once they try to start taking them in moderation. That's the problem. So that's what we're talking about with the clean eating thing. There are people who basically have to eat clean, which means minimal junk food, minimal processed sugar, plenty of fiber, plenty of vegetables, so that they don't overeat due to food addictions. And those food addictions, a counselor is not going to help because it is a neurotransmitter issue in their brain. And the best way to deal with something that is an addiction issue for you due to brain chemistry is abstinence. You don't tell alcoholics to drink 2 glasses of wine every night in moderation. You don't tell a heroin addict to only inject 1/3 of the syringe once a day. It doesn't fucking work. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.